Here to be able to begin, or should we wait for anybody else? We want to make sure all our presenters are here and everything else before we begin. We all set? What?
You're all set. We have. Yep.
Okay, very good. Thank you.
5 voting members.
Well, welcome everyone. We will call the MPO together and open with any matters from the public. Is there anyone who would like to address us about anything? We will close that part and move on to agenda. Any changes, questions, or suggestions about the agenda? Don't see anything there, so we will approve that and charge on. What about the meeting minutes from September 26th, which unfortunately I missed? Anyone who read the minutes from being there may have a comment or a motion.
I move that we approve the minutes.
Yes.
September.
All right.
Second.
Thank you. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? No, very good. We finished the minutes. So we will zoom on to LRTP 2045. And Wood, help us out.
Sure. So, unfortunately, I was not able to make the last meeting, but it sounds like that there was interest in kind of having a little bit of more of a deep dive work session. So it's kind of why we're here today. And I've structured my bit in 2 parts. One is to provide a little background information to kind of think higher level, and then we'll deep dive into a discussion of the projects. The hopeful outcome today is to get some direction from you all on what we want to start analyzing as our next scenario. And the next scenario is really important because it is what will continue to be able to compare to the results that we've gotten. And we are using this process because this is kind of best practices that have been identified through a lot of other people doing LRTPs. And it's also a practice that was implemented with our last plan. So it's kind of a continuation of processes that have already been in place. One of the benefits of this whole scenario-based approach, Jacob and I were kind of having a discussion about it this morning, and he pointed out that doing a scenario-based approach allows us to really make sure that we have a variety of project types that end up on our constrained list. And it also allows projects that might otherwise not really show up in terms of their benefit when it comes to the regional travel demand modeling to kind of show their colors in the analysis system. So with that, I'll kind of jump in to things. And one of the things I wanted to touch on right off the bat was this long-range plan versus smart scale. Some of this is evolving. We are, from what I can understand, the first MPO to have to go through the long-range transportation planning process with this kind of the fully baked smart scale rubric. So there's still some, between OP and VDOT and stuff, things continue to evolve as information is developed, but in general, for background, long-range transportation plans are a federal requirement. Required to be fiscally constrained based on a reasonable expectation of funding over the plan's lifespan. In this case, 25 years. We've gotten those numbers from VDOT and kind of tweaked them based on our past smart scale performance, because that's the avenue at which projects are now really funded, especially the larger projects that are more regional in nature. Long range plan does not fund projects. That is done through smart scale, through HSIP, through what's TAP?
Revenue share,
Revenue.
Transportation alternative enhancement.
And we're told that long range plans have to focus on that regionally significant need. One way of stating that is it looks at regional networks, regional moving through, around, to, in and out, and really focuses on those, is it collector and above, if you were talking about the classification of your roadways. Long range, 25-year plus period, projects evaluated locally based on what a community cares about. Uses performance-based planning, which is one of those federal requirements. The plan is one of the 2 tools that we use to support the requirements in MAP 21, which is these national goals and the national performance measures. prioritizes projects in the sense that it provides some level of guidance in terms of a short, medium, and a long-term horizon in terms of teeing up projects. Smart Scale is a state system for evaluating projects for the inclusion in the state 6-year plan, right? Chuck's here to check me on anything I say about Smart Scale. He lives and breathes this stuff.
Not my choice.
Definitely drew the short
It's gone
straw
from
on
spoon
that one.
feeding to force feeding. Open enrollment, if you will, to use the healthcare system, is every 2 years, and it's shorter range, 6 years. So, and it's a change from previous processes for funding in Virginia, in that if a project is funded in Smart Scale, it's funded to 100% of that project's expected cost. Projects in Smart Scale are evaluated and scored using weighted performance measures. And it is the method by which larger LRTP projects tend to get funded.
So does a Smart Scale project have to be an LRTP project?
If you're getting federal dollars to fund the project, it's supposed to be in your LRTP.
Okay.
Now, it can be added to your LRTP, or it could be a grouped project. I know most of our bike and ped projects are grouped, and we have safety projects that are grouped. So, when we get to the constrained list, we'll see that it's going to be difficult to fund everything that's going to be in the plan. We have pots of money that are set up for grouped projects, and then the regular list of projects, which are your really high significant major projects, will be separated out. But I want to make sure that we have at least everything. If it's not in the constrained list, it's at least in the vision list, so we can say, if money becomes available, it's referenced in there. And then if we have to go back and juggle the constrained list to put that in, because we got funding for it, we can do that. As a policy board. Well, as a policy board can add it to move it into the constrained list. We saw that with Solutions 29 last round. We had a lot of projects that were funded in that program, and they moved from the long range plan constraint list into the 6-year plan, and it freed up like $90 million of money that wasn't actually on a project in the long range plan that we could have added other projects to if necessary.
And there is some thought that we can create for things like multimodal and bike and pedestrian, some buckets that identifies a dollar amount in the constrained section of the plan that says, general multimodal improvements, $10 million or something like that, which allows the flexibility of the local governments to pursue the funding for those projects, and it allows the MPO to easily concur with those activities as local governments say, hey, we need to do some bump outs, stop signs, street crossings, on this 3/4 mile of the street. The idea is we want to make sure that this plan really serves as a tool for the region and for the local governments and maintains some flexibility.
Yeah.
There are other plans and other MPOs in the state that have taken a very hard approach that says, if it's, we have $100 million of constrained projects. If you, Spotsylvania County, want to change a project on that list, you have to then remove one of your projects in equal or greater value. There are pluses and minuses to that system, but I think it's important that we maintain the flexibility that allows cooperation on the regional level, but allows the local governments to pursue their priorities in a way that's beneficial to them.
So what's the risk in being the first MPO to go through this?
We are the guinea pig.
Right, but I mean, do we get protection in any way for being the guinea pig, or are we just pure guinea pig?
I don't know if there's any protection that we would get either way. It's just a matter of we can set the bar, so to speak. so that it's something that we're gonna have to follow, and this federal government's basically wanting the MPOs to actually go through this process so that they can have a better fund the right projects as opposed to just funding any project. So you're basically going to have to strive to meet some sort of performance measures, and they basically are establishing working with the states to identify what those measures are.
So as the guinea pig, can we push the boundaries of the envelope and ask questions that
Probably.
Set some precedent that
Yeah.
hasn't been explored before?
We've, and that's what we did between last round and this round. We had a lot of questions that came up last round dealing with park and ride lots and automated vehicles and a lot of different things that we had, and we couldn't answer them because we didn't have the capability. We still don't have a lot of the capability, but we do have some more guidance. So I think that's where we need to go. How are we going to deal with these things in the future, especially with the intrusion and with on-demand transportation services, to the point where scooters and all these other kinds of forms of transportation we'd never considered before are becoming more widely used. How do we account for them in our framework to where we can look at them and take those into consideration and as taking vehicle trips off the road, so to speak. So it's just, we got to figure out a way to do that. And I think those are some of the things that we can sort of push with some of the questions we asked and some of how we structure our program. And I think that's why that last round we looked at developing groups where we're looking at more multimodal projects, bike and pedestrian projects, to basically give us the flexibility to fund those projects in the plan without necessarily knowing what all those projects might be.
Yeah. Because we know that we need to be looking for cost-effective solutions because, Chuck, how much was the total value of the smart scale submissions this year? Something around
$7 billion.
7 for 0.85 billion in available funding.
No, it was like
less than that. 800 million.
We had $7 billion worth of projects submitted for $800 million worth of funding. So it's not even close, and it's probably going to continue to be that gap. But at least if we have the projects in our plan, we can look to try to fund them with whatever means we can get funding. Smart scale seems to be the one, and I think we're going to probably see more multimodal type of projects with those because those are the ones that you're going to get the most points for.
Is the transportation modeling software getting up to speed so that we can actually start? Because we didn't see that even with the hydraulic.
Even in the model this round, the best we can do is run some sensitivity analysis, but it doesn't get into bike and pedestrian. It gets into audio. I mean, we can look at adjusting the capacity of the roads, and we can look at adjusting the what was the other characteristic we can adjust. But basically, give us the flexibility to do. Not analyze it, but do a sensitivity run of how our projects, if we do these projects, how it's going to affect, and then run different outcomes like increase the capacity by 25% and of the roads, basically because we're using automated vehicles that take up less space. Or you could increase there's a lot of different there's a lot of different ways we can try to do that, and that's what
in the future.
Yeah. So we can look at what our group of projects, how it may work in the future based on different variables, changing different variables. But we do have that flexibility. I don't think we've used it yet, but we do have that capability.
Yeah, one more quick question. So we've all read the articles about New York City, basically making trip caps for Ubers and those type of entities. Will we in the future have any ability to put a trip cap on automated or I mean, I'm just wondering because one of the forward-looking ways of looking at this is that the automated or the Uber type vehicles are going to overpopulate the roadways, and then the people who are just trying to drive their own cars won't be able to get, or the transit entities won't be able to make use of the roads. Will we have, with everything else that's going on, will we have any ability to have any kind of a trip cap or any way to affect?
Or how do we advocate?
That's probably a good
Yeah.
conversation
Do it right
with the legislatures.
I mean, that would be something that General Assembly would pass some regulations that we are giving us the ability to
So
do.
not
That's a
right
really
now,
good point, but
possibly in the future.
So it has-
I mean, I know that some jurisdictions, I think, I know Washington DC just recently passed some legislation about restricting slug lines and all kinds of stuff, because people were double parking in the middle of the road, stopping traffic so people could get into the car so they can meet the HOV requirements. And it's just how do you address that?
But MPOs don't submit legislative requests.
I mean, we can.
Jurisdictions.
So it has to be our
jurisdictions
jurisdictions. Okay. But that would be something at some point maybe we could talk about. So what would that legislation be good at next year? You know, about like the strip cap thing, if that's something that is starting, because we're seeing the ridership go down and our buses and it's disconcerting.
Well, I think it's going to hit the major urban centers first. I just
Yeah.
wondered whether so probably what will happen is the legislation will come through the Richmond and the Novas of Virginia, and then we would be able to utilize that.
I mean, I don't know
if we needed to in the
if
future.
the General Assembly would give the localities the ability to enact that kind of legislation. Or
It's a
whether
very
they
anti-business
can or can't. I don't know.
approach. I'm not
Yeah,
sure
so
that
that
we'd
would-
have much chance right now. I always get hurt asking.
Yeah. But we'll probably get more. It's not something that we can look at right now.
Thank you for bringing that up.
All right.
So jumping back,
Yeah.
just some more basic points about the long range plan. Updated every 5 years. That's just the requirement. These are designed to be, as Chuck was alluding to, like living documents, especially with smart scale. You know, by action of the board, the documents can be adjusted, projects can be shuffled, anything can be kind of reassessed. That's really the 5 years is to update kind of the demographic side and somewhat aligned with releases from the census. Projects that, basically address the needs based on population, housing, and employment growth. Those are kind of our drivers of transportation demand. Account for financial forecast during the plan update process. Physically constrained, that was what we were talking about, and then this unconstrained visioning list contains the wide range of projects or locations where a need has been identified for addressing safety, congestion, accessibility, and those kinds of things. LRTP process steps, so kind of boiling it down into the recipe. This is very similar to what was the process used last time and guidance from best practices from FHWA. Develop goals and objectives. We got those on the wall. Performance criteria, that's included in the poster over there with the introduction. That's all the evaluation criteria. Develop project lists. Evaluate projects and scenarios. Develop final scenario list. Constrain project based on the available expected funding.
So are we at 4?
We're at 5.
Okay.
Evaluate projects and scenarios. So we've run the first grouping of scenarios and kind of established and seen the results of that.
Couldn't see the arrow.
Oh, well, it wasn't there. I just turned it.
We had 2 big
PowerPoint WYSIWYG did. So goals and objectives, the performance criteria aligned with the goals and objectives, deficiency analysis, crashes, congestion, system gaps, transit needs, pavement condition, and bridge condition, kind of all things that get looked at and get baked into the layer cake. Candidate project lists, this was developed kind of from that and with discussions with our local staff and kind of hearing from you all at meetings. And this is what constituted that first scenario grouping. So kind of timeline and like flowchart system. So potential projects, priority projects is kind of round 2, filtering it down a little more, final scenario list, filtering down a little more, and then that constrained grouping. And at any point in this process, we can kind of pull projects into the visioning list. Or if there are quote unquote bad projects, we can hit the brakes on those projects and we can just pull them out and say we don't need those in our plan. That's kind of the way that we're looking to kind of shape into and hone it down towards getting a constrained list together. So at any point in that process, we can kind of put projects into that visioning basket.
Punt them for a while.
Yeah.
So it's really a wish list?
Kind of a wish
Well,
list, desire,
In the old
But it
days,
has-
things had to be on the vision list before they could,
Got it,
or
okay.
one of the two, in
Yeah.
order to be brought into the tip. So that was just
Got it,
placed
okay.
as things start to evolve.
Yeah.
They needed to evolve from there.
Questions on this?
So, I guess just my one thing about the vision list is, does that mean, are the things that go into the vision list not moving forward into the LRTP, or is it the opposite of that?
They are in the LRTP. The LRTP essentially has two lists. The constrained list, which is what the federal government really cares about. We're demonstrating that we're looking at our money and saying this is what we could reasonably build with what money we expect to see in the next 25 years. The visioning list is unconstrained. This is maybe more our community's desires, and it has greater importance in the era of smart scale because if it's on the visioning list, it's defined as in the long-range transportation plan. And that allows the Kevin McDermotts to work with Albemarle County to say, oh, and that those letters of resolution are included, and you can make sure everything kind of ties in to support kind of the goals of mobility, access, and safety.
It works 2 different ways. The visioning list includes like all of your bike and bed projects that are in the groups, as well as the safety projects that are in the groups, because those aren't necessarily identified.
Quickly
per se.
define the grouping.
The groups are basically we have the main pot of money, and then I wish you had that. You have that little pie chart that had it split out. At the last meeting, they showed a pie chart where we had different funding set up. We had a roadway section, we had a safety section, and then we had for all practical for biking ed, it was enhancement for other projects. So those were the funding was set up in those 3 pots of money, the overall budget. And then we established what those were based on the amount of money we had for those groups in the tip. So we just figured out what that was per year, and we forecasted it out 25 years, and that's where we identified how much money was in there. It's like $55 million in the safety and $55 million in bike and ped. And then the bridge was the other section, and that had a funding source, but that's directly identified based on the needs that we got from the district on the project.
Condition of bridges.
Yeah. So that was specified, and then the rest of it was just left as the overall pot of money for the long range plan, and that's what we programmed. Mm-hmm. The rest of it was just a pot of money that we had a list of projects for, so we could interchange those. But it doesn't mean that Georgetown Road, here's one project that was done a couple years ago. It was funded with safety funds. So it didn't necessarily have to be in the list, but it was a project that was, because it was grouped.
As we said,
Yeah.
Safety needs, address safety
in the
needs.
vision list, but it ended up being a safety project as opposed to a main project. Mm-hmm. So it just gives us a flexibility, especially on some of the smaller scale projects to actually have them in the plan, even though they may not necessarily be in the roadway portion where the bulk of your main significant projects are located. Does that make sense?
It's
I
helpful.
think it's good to give VDOT a shout out for being very creative with when it comes to getting projects funded, to really trying to identify the best way to get
I mean, that's
money on projects.
Solutions 29, those were all projects that were in the list. They weren't necessarily in the constrained portion of the list. Some of them were, but all of them were in there. Some of them were in the safety, like Rio Road interchange. Let's see.
That's interesting.
And Hillsdale or Hydraulic Road, that was in the safety list.
Interesting. Okay.
So we got funding on it, and we were able to start that, even though it wasn't in the constraint list, but it was in the plan as a safety project.
That helps.
Does that make sense?
Although Rio didn't seem to get safer.
Well,
Which
it's
part you're talking about
when
the
it's
last
when
time?
it's when it's evaluated. It's evaluated
gone
on
zero.
several categories, and congestion relief is one of them, and it does allow for traffic movement through the corridor much more
I mean,
efficiently.
from killing people every now and then, we have had no accidents, so that seems like a big change in safety, you know, I mean, if you-
And I
it's
think
like the roundabout at the airport, which Chuck and I fought about for 20 years.
Oh, yeah.
But we've stopped killing people out there, which is really great. That means we're doing something right.
So does that answer your question? Okay. I mean, that's what I want to try, and the way I try to structure it, I try to match so we can take the projects from the long range plan and they go right into the tip. And last round we'll get to it, but we had project pages for every project like we had this time. And these would match what is in the tip document. So you basically could take this page and put it right in the tip from the long range plan. And that's the way we try to set it up, so it makes it like here's the clear process on how we're moving these projects forward.
And having the extra information with the page that goes all the way along is really good.
Yeah. So
We can look back and find the prices and stuff.
So, kind of moving forward with our agenda, this was breaking up kind of that bigger list and figuring out, okay, we need to do some scenario evaluation. We need to do a round one of this, and you need to really be able to benchmark scenarios against other scenarios, because that's the best way we can see results. So we looked at the projects and kind of loosely defined 3 scenarios. A capacity scenario where the projects were kind of more of your traditional capacity focused projects, to a connectivity scenario where you're looking at kind of connectivity, and then a third scenario being more multimodal, kind of all being run and compared to each other in this round one grouping. The kind of the footnote here is that in all of those analyses we included the current smart scale applications. And that's because, again, this is just the oddness of timing. Those projects are they're sitting on the bubble because they're technically not funded yet. Well, they have not received funding yet, so they are not at the point when they would go from a long range project to a 6-year plan project. So map, this is the spatial distribution of those same projects. Copy of that map's on the wall. Potential transit projects, that's purely a map of the transit projects. Note here, that Jacob wanted me to call out is the stops are conceptual and really just for analysis purposes. The dots representing stops, that was just to help us do an analysis. It's not saying that this is where the exact location of a stop for a limited stop bus service. Stuff like that would come out as the projects get developed if there's a particular study focused on that. You know, it's important to remember that all of that stuff for all of the processes around Solutions 29 was in that zone of before smart scale, not Solutions 29, excuse me, Hydraulic 29 was before smart scale. So these are really, everything in the plan is very conceptual. It's more of thinking about we need something here, not saying exactly that I'm gonna have, a series of 6 lights that'll have 200-foot turn lanes with a active light control system. It's more saying, in general, this is the kind of thing we would expect here, and in general, that would cost roughly this based on really high-level planning cost estimates. So, with all that information, we had the quantitative results that came out of our performance evaluation system. Jacob probably covered these at the last meeting.
Yeah.
And more of the visual way of looking at it is this graphic. And this graphic, as we do the next round of evaluation, will be added to. So you'll be able to see how A, B, C, then D and E kind of all stack up against each other. And again, that's that scenario approach to evaluation. Because a lot of these projects, if we run them through the analysis processes, you might not see a lot of change in the tools that are kind of calibrated for a regional analysis. Anything you want to add?
I don't think so. Are there any additional questions here? I know the one time this came up before, there was some question about, the fact there are different scales on different ones, and some see a major change, some see less change, and what that means. I mean, really, these kind of first 3 scenarios are that benchmark, like Wood said, so that we can see, how a multimodal scenario improves multimodal activity centers or improves congestion compared to the capacity scenario. So again, with kind of the idea in mind that we have a large list of projects currently and we need to narrow that down, these are kind of in an ideal scenario, if we chose to build all the capacity projects, this would be the result. And we know we're not going to choose that scenario that would be way more money than we have to build all the capacity projects. So this will show, if we choose one of the capacity projects, what the result is, or if we choose a few of the multimodal projects, what the result is. And so it'll be these future scenarios we'll be able to compare against these kind of initial benchmark or baselines.
Questions before we move into the project discussion?
Well, I clearly don't understand that, but I'm not going to ask about it because later on maybe I will. So I'm just gonna...
Yeah, and the other thing I would say is, this is meant to be, visually helpful to just say, oh look, the multimodal improves the bicycle and pedestrian network by about twice of the connectivity scenario. It's the numbers are on the previous page. So if you want to see 100 miles of new, not that many, but new bicycle and pedestrian connection, something that probably makes more sense, that's on the previous page with all the numbers.
Think of it, it's like
it's only when you see it with real numbers that it begins to be.
Yeah.
Like financial, it's more like a financial, like the dashboard for financial reporting and kind of stuff. You can see, you can kind of look down and see, okay, there's positive progress being made in activity centers. However, in environment and community, that there are some negative externalities associated with that grouping.
So these 5 performance metrics are going to be used to measure each project.
Each grouping of
each grouping being these scenarios.
Yes, correct. Okay, so we're going to go into, I'm going to switch to the project fact sheets and kind of use that as the discussion point for today. But what I recommend everybody does that has a packet is pull off the very last page and just kind of rip it out of your packet.
So I wrote all the money down.
Yeah.
You left the money off, which is important because we only have X number of dollars. So.
This was our attempt at coming up with a grouping of projects for that second round of evaluation. This was based on feedback that we got at the public meetings, feedback we got from CTAC and MPO Tech. And it's kind of the starting point for today's discussion. The idea being that we'd like to hear from you all what mix we should be looking at in this next round of evaluation.
And does it matter that the jurisdictions are wrong in this chart? on some of these things?
That we can change that. That's
Okay.
probably just Excel not sorting
Just
the way.
didn't match properly.
Yeah, not the way it's supposed to
Okay,
sort.
very good.
So as I tee up, people can take a look at. So two options, and I wanted to see what you guys would prefer. Do you want me to kind of run through each project and to ask questions? Kind of, I'll give the details, and we can kind of go through them that way, or are there just projects that people want to jump right to and kind of start that way? What's the purview of the board in terms of?
Would it be sensible for you to say why these three were taken out, just to get them off the plate? Then we don't have to discuss it anymore.
Sure, we could do that. That would be, so let's take a look at R1. We got a lot of, especially from the boards, we got a lot of feedback on these projects. And one of the main concerns was looking at that cost and kind of understanding that cost.
That's fine.
That's a lot of money.
Mm-hmm.
It's a lot of money, and a lot of folks identified, is there really that great of a need for making this particular improvement
Right now.
right now?
Yeah.
Or really even into the future? I think modeling was showing some segments with congestion appearing. You can see that in kind of the yellow.
Red especially.
Yeah, and the red
That there.
up here, I mean, that's forecasted level of service F by 2045.
And that's most likely because of the people exiting onto 250 West. So once that's resolved, that'll probably go away.
No, the model looks more at kind of pure capacity. It doesn't look at, kind of intersection challenges with turn lanes and whatnot. So
It's the volume on the road.
yeah, it's the volume.
Right,
It's
but
not
it's moving
saying-
now. It's
it's
not
not saying
except for
that-
the exit, so that's fine.
During that segment of road has a lot of volume because people are getting on from Barracks Road and getting off at Ivy Road.
Yeah,
But
that's right.
the volume is such that it exceeds the capacity of the roadway, not the interchanges
In 2045.
in
Projected.
2045.
Yeah.
Okay.
I mean, last round it was red all the way down to exit 124 at 64, but where that was the worst. And that's one of the reasons why this was on there
That's
as
118, by the way.
118.
That has to be fixed.
Yeah, that's changed by 118. And that section between Fontaine Avenue and 64 was actually the highest volume segment of the entire network. But it doesn't appear that it's that way now. So I don't know if it's something to do with the upgraded model, that it may not be showing as many trips, or some other improvements that occurred that weren't in the previous model that are in this model.
The amount of money for our constrained plan is what? About this much, right? 250, I mean, it was 250 for the 2020.
For the roadway project, it's less than this,
Yeah.
Once you take out the bridge, the road,
Yeah.
pedestrian,
in
bike
the
pedestrian and
hundreds.
safety. Yeah,
60 or something.
Yeah.
It's,
160 million is our constrained thing for
yeah, it's pretty
2045?
low. Yeah.
For roadway only, not including the groups.
Oh, I understand, but
Yeah.
there are a whole lot of
Yeah.
bike ped stuff that's in this list that would be part of that 180, 160. Right? If they're on this
Maybe.
list,
Doesn't
why
have
do
to
we?
be.
Okay,
It
well,
doesn't.
anyway, we'll figure that out
Yeah.
later then.
And that's why I said you could have something that may show up on the list that would be funded in one of those other groups.
Okay, and
So-
you can identify those as we go along,
Yeah.
so we don't
Yeah.
cloud our brains with.
I have a question about two projects, the R5, the US 250 Free Bridge, and the R19 Pantops Bridge, because they were scoring really close. But one made it to the visioning list, but the other one was included in scenario E. So the US 250 Free Bridge widening and the South Pantops Drive Bridge, I thought they were trying to deal with the same problem. So
The one's widening Free Bridge, the other one's a new bridge.
I know that,
Tubby's
but
Bridge.
the problem was
Same
solving the
process.
access across the river. They both are trying to solve that problem. So why would you have both?
I don't know,
Takes
that's
both
I don't
to
think
solve
it
the
is.
problem, I think.
I mean, they were both identified as solutions to the problem, it was just how do you wanna solve the problem?
Mhm.
So you can put
So they
either
were
one of
really
them on
close
there.
neck and
Yeah.
neck, I mean,
Close in what way?
scoring.
In the vote. Well, these
Yeah.
are just votes of people.
And
That's not
and when we were
official
talking,
scoring,
it
so.
almost seemed like there's some cost differential, but I do think that there were, I don't know, it's just something that close and that needs some more careful scrutiny, because that night I was there was a lot of people talking about the benefits of R19 and not, so I'm just not understanding how that judgment call is made, because I'm not seeing, and the other one, the longevity of the 250 Free Bridge, as I recall when it came up the last time, it was gonna be in failure within a short amount of time. It wasn't gonna solve the problem of congestion for very long.
I don't remember what the analysis showed. And a really
It's rated
thorough
good right now.
analysis, I'm not sure what the model shows, but the analysis is actually not that intense that was done on it. It was more of a high level analysis. We did it as part of the MPO ecological study, and we didn't have, other than the model and the travel demand model and some other tools, we didn't do like a VISM or a synchro analysis on that to see actually how it may function from a micro simulation type of.
In other words, most of the assessments have been done just looking at the capacity, like we were
Yes.
saying before, and not looking at the function of the intersections, which of course are a major
It's major.
aspect
How it
of,
would
of how
theoretically
that
work.
right, of how that functions,
Mhm.
how that performs.
I mean, and that seems to be mostly the reason why we're having such a problem there. It's the intersection functionality as opposed to the road.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And yet we haven't studied the
Well, the
functionality of
ability
the
of the people
intersection.
to exit the road going, or go up the hill going west is a major.
I mean, the county
Okay.
submitted
There's nowhere
that,
for 'em to
one of
go.
those intersections as a smart scale
20
project.
to 250.
Mhm.
Yes,
Top priority.
so that's one of the
Yeah.
projects that was submitted this round of smart scale.
That's number one, isn't it?
Yes, it was. It includes bike, pedestrian, additional lanes, turn
But that could be
lanes,
done
and
that alone could be done in combination with this other bridge. I'm just
We could, there is the option, of course, to modify what that project is. It could be identified as something as simple as, address congestion in the Free Bridge area.
right.
Again, like the hydraulic 29 process, that started without knowing what the
Actual things.
Yeah, so that makes more sense to me.
Yeah, and we as long as we can kind of come up with something that gives us a ballpark cost that we can use, or we can put it in the visioning list and we don't need to attach a cost to it, right, Chuck?
Yeah.
I mean, especially if the city decision makers have concerns with doing what's proposed here, then that's, if we're talking about tying up $24 million and the jurisdiction doesn't want it, because they were very clear, I thought, before to say we're not going to add a lane to St. Clair.
Yeah.
Then I think we
That's-
should recognize that right
that's what
off the bat
that's
and
what I'm
not
getting
keep
at,
talking
that-
about it.
That
Right
go
now.
with something that
So
may have more political feasibility.
Well, and the other side of this coin is, we're not at the stage now to where we're gonna be looking at constraining the projects list.
Yeah.
We can get to that later.
So you're saying
down
you
the
can
road.
flip these around
Yeah, this is
as long as they made it, as long as they weren't removed.
and this is or we can pull up projects that are listed removed here. This is just the straw man draft
Right.
starting point.
So today we can. If
Yeah.
something ends today in the visioning list, it would be discouraged to bring it back and put it in the constrained list, in the next two meetings. So
but in 5 years.
Yeah.
Maybe
Oh,
that-
yeah. Absolutely. Because
Absolutely.
that's the idea of the
So,
visioning list.
and so to include in scenario E, I mean, I'm feeling like South Pantops Drive Bridge R19 should be down there along with the Free Bridge widening and let that be played out as time goes on.
Now, should we
As it's refined.
now for the
If-
benefit?
That's what I'm saying, is
yeah.
including in scenario E mean that it's actually in a constrained list?
No.
Nothing's
So
in
what-
constraint.
So what does
Nothing's
include in both scenarios D and E mean then?
They're gonna rerun those,
Those are gonna be
them against those
considered
performance
as the base projects, and then we're gonna run this list plus these, and this list plus these,
Yeah.
as one scenario and then the other scenario. And then we're gonna compare those two and see what the results are. And
And-
it could be that you may wanna move some of these that are in both lists down to one or the other, so you get some more little diversity in between what you're comparing.
So how would we make it so that the South Pantops Drive Bridge gets more closer consideration?
We can pull that out of the visioning list and we could place that in scenario D or E. It would be probably staff's recommendation to place those projects in different scenarios so we can actually
Got
see
it.
so we can
Alright,
see
So
some
let's put
Yeah, let's do that.
R19 into D, what do you think?
That sounds, is
And
that that
nothing
sounds-
makes me happier than to
Yep.
hear you say you're interested in studying that some more, so that's
Yeah,
great.
I know Mr. Hoosier wasn't, and
Yeah,
I'm
this
not
is-
Mr. Hoosier.
there
It's a long
are
time
multiple
in the
bites of
briars.
this apple. So
Lots of stomping around in the polo grounds,
So-
I mean, the circus grounds down there, looking for a place, so that's
so
great.
that's kind of direction for
Okay.
that's the first one is kind of move R19 into scenario D.
Okay, we're learning how to do this.
Yeah. And then keep
Is that a
US
little bit
250
like
keep
poker?
R5, yes it is a lot like poker. Keep R5 and E for now so we can see
Got it.
compare and
Okay.
contrast.
Good.
What was the price? R19. 31, okay.
You will notice that there's I just caught this in the project visioning list. R7 is included in the visioning list and included in D. It should be included in D. So you can just strike it from
Oh,
the visioning
Okay.
list. It's being
it's
it's being
studied.
evaluated.
Got it.
Can I ask a
Sure.
sort of higher level?
Absolutely.
Have you run these already? Have you done any running of
No.
these? No. So you're just trying to create a couple scenarios that you can run.
We ran A, B, and C, and that's the results we were talking about with this. We want to do our second batch, which is what we're trying to create here,
Which will be D and E.
which will be D and E, and we can compare those to round one, as well as comparing D to E.
And how, since it's also hard for me to read that diagram, how will we know how we're comparing the A through E against each other? I mean, how will it be transparent? What positives and negatives those scenarios have against each other?
That's that performance criteria that we
That's mainly the numbers on page.
Yeah, mainly the numbers that are before this.
that drive the
this
charting.
diagram. Yeah.
Which are completely incomprehensible.
Yeah,
I mean, I don't know what to do with them, what are these numbers and what do they mean? Capacity, there are 23,700 people who can go.
So on a different sheet, which we should have included, it explains it's what's up on the wall there.
Okay.
It was in one of our slides, but I mean, it was certainly included in past packets, but it should have been included right before this too. It indicates, lists out what all of those.
Yeah.
Is this all
I wanna look
transparent
at
to you
one other
when you-
project
Absolutely.
and look
I mean,
at R 12.
I mean, it's clear,
Yeah,
right? But I mean, can you look at this and
Oh, sorry.
model
Sorry.
it in
Well,
your
yeah,
head?
I wasn't sure if we did
Did we-
respond
did we-
to
did we
Julia's
respond?
question adequately. Did you?
Yeah, I think the
Yeah,
numbers are
response.
probably the best.
Yeah.
I guess what's hard for me to vet is all of these measures or what I would call metrics or criteria against each other, like how we evaluate them in a way that is equal. Because some people are only going to be concerned about congestion.
Absolutely.
But I'm just, I'm wondering how do we equally evaluate congestion against bus,
Connectivity and-
bike, ped network? kind of thing.
I think last round we did some sort of weighting. And then
What I had seen from last round
Came
was
up with
very confusing to
score.
understand.
5
They
years ago, it was awful.
Yeah.
Yes, I agree.
And it was a
mess.
colored
And it was
spreadsheet
big
with
maps and they had
It was
incomprehensible numbers all over them.
Yeah.
So that's
Color
not-
yeah,
codes.
they color coded things and then made statements about the fact that certain scenarios didn't meet certain criteria, even though those criteria were never stated. Or there seemed to be like maybe arbitrary 10% improvements were what mattered,
Yeah.
but
They were small.
So-
Yeah, I'm
From
trying-
the innocent bystander looking, it looked like, here was the conclusion we want, and therefore here's the testing we're gonna do to get that conclusion, and that was a
I
really
mean,
big problem.
we set up
So-
goals and we had criteria for the goals. And the problem we have is, and it's sort of the same thing we have with Smart Scale, you've gotta have data to support, to do the evaluation.
Mm-hmm.
And you can only evaluate what you have data for. So part of what we did with identifying what these were and is what do we have data for that we can actually
I
determine.
see,
So
okay,
we identified these
Yeah.
things, these different goals, and ranked them not ranked them, but came up with these categories based on the data that we could
Mhm.
use,
Right.
that we had, and that's why it looks like this. So it does make it kind of abstract, sort of, but I mean, you can see the difference between this project and that project based on that criteria, but to rank them total overall, to come up with an overall score might be kind of difficult, because you're not comparing, for each field, you have a different number there.
Sure, I understand that. We might need, the only way I can kind of analogize this is like, as an architect, you have people looking at a building design or an image of a facade and they say, why don't you have white columns, or like they'll say things that are unhelpful because they don't understand really what the building is trying to accomplish. So I'm trying to figure out how we can be helpful to you without just throwing out random comments because we don't understand the pluralistic goal well enough.
And I think, the goal is kind of expressed in the goals and objectives, and that's why we did the best using the data that we had to crosswalk with those. And there's no priority assigned to one goal versus another
That's
goal.
why we might need to weight them.
The difficulty in weighting is how do we do it? And what
How is that not subjective?
yeah, how is that not subjective as well? Ultimately we're just trying to identify a basket of projects. And in some cases it might be better, even though these are long range plans, to say, okay, what's really going to address the now? Because we understand the now. The future is a lot hazier today than it was 5 years ago, because of all the stuff that we have just discussed at the beginning of the meeting, technology, changing, commute habits, all of the stuff that you guys are probably struggling with your transportation planning.
I'm also going to just say, maybe on the architect, comparison, everybody has their own opinions in architecture. They might seem really unhelpful. This is meant to be very easy to understand, so that, if we create a scenario D and it shows a very small improvement here, very limited improvement in bicycle and pedestrian network compared to the other three lines, all we're looking for is, why is that such a small bar? That
way to
really
see
is
it.
the feedback that we'll be
Yeah,
looking
yeah,
for.
yeah.
This is meant to be not technical. This is meant to be something that you can see, oh wow,
It's
this new
it's the
scenario
warning
is
light.
not performing compared to the three benchmarks. Trying to weight these somewhat equally by showing each of these 10 each of these 10 measures.
If you look at it just quickly, scenario A has the longest bars overall, right?
It's the darkest green.
Keep in mind, some of them are negative,
C looks pretty good.
Right, okay.
but yes.
C, which is that multimodal, modeling suggests it performs the poorest at addressing congestion mitigation, but it does a really good job addressing safety, multimodal access to multimodal activity centers, mode transfers, resident access to transit, economic, environment, and community factors. Kind of all of the stuff that particular one addresses, all of the stuff that is important that we've heard from through our public meetings that's important to the community.
The local community.
Yeah.
They
And the idea of having this mix and these not being prioritized is maybe in the past transportation planning, the priority was congestion mitigation.
well, and if and when we ever get our analytical tools improved to the point where we can understand how mode shift does affect congestion, it's like right now we just can't measure it. And that's a disservice to those multimodal projects.
And we recognize that, and that's why the
Right.
scenario approach is
Yeah,
used, so
that's
we can
why
kind of
just at least make it.
you can group those multimodal projects, and a grouping of multimodal projects you see a benefit. Whereas if we looked at Rio Road as a singular project, we might not see a benefit, especially if we were trying to compare that to, a mega project of some kind. Is that helping? Kind of. Now,
I have a couple more county projects that I'm going to be advocating for.
Why is the Berkmar on two lists?
That's
Berkmar Drive extension.
Berkmar is
It's on the
Yep.
included both and
Yep.
envisioning. I would presume it should be included both and not just.
It's let's call it included in both.
That's
Yeah,
what I
that
think.
was.
Oh, okay, good. So that was a question of mine. So Berkmar is going to be analyzed further.
Yes,
Okay.
absolutely.
Yes, that was based on some feedback we received from Kevin McDermott right before the last meeting. That, different aspects
good,
of
so
that.
that
are
one goes
moving
away.
forward, so.
Because it's in our application process.
Right, so the one piece of it is a smart scale application currently. The other piece, UVA, I believe it's UVA Foundation that has the research park up there, is also working to build, so.
We're reviewing road plans on that already.
Okay. So the other one I had was the Sunset Fontaine Connector.
R12. Conveniently the next project. Okay.
So, and I find it interesting that the cover open house, pretty good showing wanting it, and then
Yeah.
it was SeaTac that said no. So, who's
Do you-
on SeaTac?
Do you want to take a gander at maybe providing some context
So
to the
that's what I-
CTAC
that's
feedback?
what I thought. So
None
it's
of these
interesting.
numbers are.
I'm just curious.
Just information.
Yes, and
But
one.
I
We
hear-
cannot, this is not a vote that we have to,
Right.
this is just people.
This
No,
is
but I
just-
hear a
people
lot from
comment.
people about
Yeah.
wanting this Fontaine.
It's helpful to keep in mind,
I mean, so
what.
that's what I'm trying to
Right.
rationalize.
What is suggesting I should mention is that for CTAC, we had these posters or projects on the wall and asked people to put dots for projects that they supported or they thought should be pushed to the side. And so it's possible that a few people put negative dots on this project, and then that perhaps subconsciously kind of encouraged additional people to say it was a project that shouldn't be considered further, as opposed
Herd
to.
mentality.
So yes, that is one of the things to keep in mind with these CTAC numbers is they may have, kind of subconsciously grouped to
And
one
for
way
the
or
open
another.
house, the votes there, is that 12 out of the 60 that came, or did they have multiple dots?
Oh, there's a lot.
themselves?
One there,
500
that would be
We had 7 dots, several different colors.
Yeah,
So
correct.
that's another
Yeah.
scale.
It's
12
500 and
versus
some
yeah,
other
out of
dots.
500 and some.
Yeah, again, it's included as information. It's probably the equivalent of going like the wind is out of the southwest.
Because
It's
this
just
is
kind
another
of
one where it
taking
would
the-
take a major change in policy for that to go forward, because that's not something that the city wants right now. Thus the bollards at the end of the street
Well,
to
it's
stop
it's
traffic coming through there, so.
it's a tough one. cause people have expressed wanting it too. I mean, it's not, I'm just,
This has come in, this has been on the plan for a
I
long
know, it's
time.
been a long time, and I kinda wanna, like, do we analyze it and get it off the books, or what? I mean, otherwise it's just gonna keep
I
lingering.
mean, it's been through 2 Area B studies and it was
Yeah.
identified in both of them. And then.
Because I remember I was on
But
the
without
Area
the
B
policy
study
board,
way
I
back
mean,
when.
without the electeds saying that it should go
Well-
forward, there's no point in spending money.
Yeah, if
That's-
that's-
Well, and that's, it's not saying that
It's not
you're.
been this crop of electeds.
Yeah,
It hasn't come up to you yet, but I
Yeah.
hope that will be something for you all.
well,
to
and we
discuss.
haven't gotten to the point where we're funding projects yet either. So it's just a matter of, do you wanna carry it forward to consider it, or do you just wanna put it on the visioning list? I think that's the
Well, that's
question
what
you
it
need
is.
to ask.
Yeah.
Do you wanna
I mean, I would
continue
like
to
to
have
get
it
it,
there?
I'd like to put it for
Because-
consideration.
Yeah, I mean, the thing about this is, you've got the development, the Granger property on that one quadrant, which is showed, and then the University Foundation, University now
That's building out more.
is building out more, and it's gonna cost their property on that piece of it. You've got a 1-lane railroad underpass that's there
And
now,
2 bridges over water.
and 2 bridges over water, unless you run it up the bank hill further, and it's just how do you
Take it up
cross?
to the high ground.
We've even looked at running an alternative where you cross at the high point, where you can go over the railroad tracks
Yeah.
and come in back here, and then you've gotta wind your way through the university property, which I don't know if that's something that they're even,
Well,
in
they
the
vetoed
past,
it
they
flat
didn't
when I
wanna do
asked
it.
them 5 years ago,
so I don't think that's changed. So it's very limited as to what we can do here, and it's really costly, especially if you get to that railroad underpass.
Yeah.
Because the underpass is in the floodplain. So every time it's high water, the road's closed. So you're really limited as to what you can do at
So
this point.
why does it keep coming up though? What are the benefits of it?
There's all this development that's in the county on Sunset.
Right.
You've got Redfields, you've got all these 2 university housing complexes right there. And then
Right,
you've got a
that's-
whole bunch of
that's
stuff
a-
down on the other
That's
side of
actually not
60.
university,
Well,
that's
it's not-
private development.
It's
Yeah.
private, but
Student.
it's student housing.
But there's
Sorry.
it's only 30%
Is it
is
Collegiate
students.
Hall?
It's
Well,
From
moved.
both developments,
Okay.
only 30%,
'Cause
so
They
Yeah.
wanted
I
to
just
be
have
on
to
West
keep
Main Street.
saying
Plus,
it's
it's
not
moving up there, it's just-
university
Well, I'm
housing.
just saying,
They
it was
wanted to be on West
originally
Main
it was
Street.
Collegiate Hall.
Well, that's what they positioned it as,
Yeah.
but obviously they haven't
It
been
hadn't
very
been-
successful.
It's a little far.
Yeah, it's so far, but I mean, they actually proffered some of the improvements that at the existing bridge now, I think they built the cover on it and put a lot of the other amenities that were on it
Yes.
as proffers from their development. But it's just, how do we build it? And that's been the issue. I mean, I know
Because
early
the
on.
price tag doesn't reflect
That's
that.
I don't
I don't think the prices
that is
are right. I
very
don't think it's
low.
close. Because
we don't have the
Yeah.
railroad
The
bridge.
railroad, yeah.
Yeah, cause we actually looked at this as part of the Fontaine when it was rezoned. We had to look at this because we had to take responsibility for part of, a possible road connection. And I can tell you that this is very low.
Yeah,
Yeah.
this is
10 times
extremely.
more.
And this was 10 years ago when we did it.
To do the railroad bridge,
Yeah.
cause you can't close that railroad, you'd have
Yeah.
to basically
You have to-
reroute, build a separate
Or you have to do the
railroad
tunnel,
facility
the
to put the
bore.
railroad on while you replace the underpass. Or build a bridge over.
But then the problem is you've only got one crossing over Jefferson Park Avenue and then the interstate. So there's that in and of itself is a real problem. There's no way to get across the railroad track. And everyone keeps avoiding doing that, and that causes congestion.
Yeah, that's true.
Yeah.
That's a good point.
So,
Yes.
sometime we gotta do something.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
no.
Yeah. No, that's a very
It's
good
an effective
point.
gravel road right now, so, a lot of people use it, a lot of people
Okay,
run on it.
I would like to just have it looked at, and of course, it's funding, and when that comes back, but it's been on the books for so long, and everyone keeps kicking it down the road, but they don't have the resolve to take it off either, because we don't know about it yet.
The road I was mentioning by mistake was actually where the bollards are, and
Yeah.
it's not connected there, Sunset, so is
Sunset.
that something the city's thinking about in the future?
I don't know what the
Letting
city's
that
thinking
cross
about
over.
on that one. I don't know.
Cause that's the much more direct,
I've
I'm
heard
sure
it-
the neighborhoods are very concerned about having it be open
I've heard of
But-
some bike and pedestrian improvements.
It's bike.
Yeah.
I mean, you can use it for that right now,
Right,
because it has a little bridge.
I mean,
and
that's
has
all
the
that's
bollards
used
there.
for.
And that's, I think, why it was originally done. That was before I even came to Charlottesville, so it's more than 20 years ago that was done. But I don't see that changing any. That's why this has become a preferred alignment of the road.
Yeah,
to make the
I think
connection.
you're right.
I mean, if you think about it, you have, a major employment center here and only gonna grow with
Yeah,
the university's interests there, and you have major residential centers here. These, right now, to get here, these folks have to come on to 64 and then exit and use.
As a for a connectivity issue, it's.
Yeah, right?
Or they
Or
go
Old
Old
Lynchburg.
Lynchburg Road
That's
to
actually
JP
a lot
Fontaine
easier than
Avenue
a
and
lot
then
of
come
the
west.
routing that you have in other places in this community. I mean, 29 South feeds Fontaine Park directly.
So I'm hearing from you, Julia, that the university doesn't want it.
Well, we just know from having looked at it that it's extremely expensive, extremely complex,
It's a big
and
lift.
probably not a good use of funds compared to other
Well, it's just,
options.
But
it would have to compete with Smart Scale and for Smart Scale funding, and it would be very, it's a secondary road from our perspective. It's not even gonna be, I don't think you'd get a very high score for the cost,
right.
because
well,
the cost would
but
be significant.
again, the more interconnectivity in a network, the more you distribute the traffic and you relieve.
Yes,
I mean, because without it, as these things keep growing,
yes.
and they're going to keep growing, congestion everywhere else is going to get worse.
Yeah.
And this is I'm trying to be a little like ahead of the curve here.
And this is the appropriate place to be ahead of the curve.
I just don't know. I don't know
I mean, so
necessarily.
does it hurt on
what
your
the
time
answer is.
then, just to take a look at it more closely?
It just gets baked into a scenario, so
Okay.
it's just,
Do you have enough information to bake it in at the high ground instead, right there where it crosses the tracks at the top and goes into that loop? Even though Fred Missile says, no, it's not gonna happen, or Tim Rose, but maybe in 15 years when other things have already happened, it may become less of a thorn in their side to do it that way.
Well,
and
I'm
go straight
sorry,
into-
Tim Rose and Fred Missile in regard to what?
Well, I mean, they were the people I spoke with back when we were working on Granger years ago and talked about connecting it right there, connecting it into the bottom of that loop.
It's not their
And-
say any longer, cause Fontaine is now owned by the university.
And we have a whole new cast of characters who own it,
Wow.
so that is a whole new world, okay. So can you think of something a little more direct that might avoid the wetland, avoid the railroad underpass, and think of a
Not
different
with our
way?
new master plan. No.
But
I mean,
this
we just
alignment
finished
doesn't-
a,
University hasn't
yeah,
done
a
this, so
year-long
This
Long
alignment
master
doesn't
plan
destroy,
that-
doesn't hurt
anything
your
else
Yeah.
master plan.
so
Well, if it doesn't hurt to do it and just throw it in there,
Yeah, I mean, that's, even keeping it in the vision list, it's still in there, but,
but you won't be comparing it to other scenarios.
well, it won't be part of the package of stuff that
Yeah,
we're
it was
further
in,
evaluating.
So put it in E, is that right?
Connectivity before.
it was in the connectivity scenario before, so it was actually part of scenario B when it was run. But we can run it again as part of D or E or both.
This, by the way, is a public website on our website. I believe it was referenced in an email or one of the packets sent to you at some point. But
And we will continue to add tabs to this this view to document the scenario 2 results and all of that,
Okay.
because it's a lot easier. That this way people can interact with it and zoom down to an area of a project rather than looking at map that size and trying to figure things out.
yeah, exactly. So the same information you've been provided in many ways,
Okay,
but
well,
in a way you can zoom into it easier. So I think the question was whether it gets included in either scenario, the Sunset Fontaine connector for any sort of additional analysis.
So which one would it go into, scenario D or E?
We could stick it in E.
I mean, I think it is a little bit hard to project exactly how the scenarios are going to, the results of the next scenarios will be helpful. I mean, it's easiest to think of them in kind of binary, like D is currently a little more of this kind of connectivity, the projects we previously referred to as connectivity. So if we wanted to continue that, we could add this, what was previously identified as a connectivity project, to D and identify that as, you know, a somewhat connectivity focused scenario. But there's no need to constrain ourselves in that way and to say, let's put all the connectivity projects together. So yeah, it would be certainly okay to add this to scenario E.
And
where
what
we
is
would
E
look at it.
associated with?
Currently it is 2 capacity projects, or primarily capacity projects.
I don't see this, at least at this point, capacity oriented.
No. So we could put it in D.
Yeah, I think
D
that makes
D is a
sense.
fine home for it.
What's, if E is capacity, what is D?
But wouldn't that balance if you have some
Connectivity.
connectivity in with the capacity projects in E? I
That was
understand.
my point.
I don't
There's
understand, but it
there's
seems
nothing
like it's
saying
good
at
to
this
mix them all
point.
up.
Oh.
There's nothing saying at this point we need to separate them.
But you wanted more scenarios, projects to compare to each other? Is that why?
Some kind of balance, I don't know, we'll see how it turns out.
We could
I don't know what
also
you're-
create a scenario F.
I mean, what,
Yeah.
what's easiest and makes most sense at this point, there's interest in this project, that's all I can say.
That's
And however you wanna, wherever you wanna put it,
Find somewhere.
let's put it in
right.
let's put it in D for now. Yeah.
Excuse me, Wood or Jacob, could I ask a quick question about these scenarios? Is the idea that you would, I mean, wouldn't you wanna compare scenarios that kind of do the same thing? As in, like you want we were talking about the free bridge, you would want R19 and R5 in different scenarios so that they're compared against each other.
Right.
And wouldn't you wanna do that as a theme throughout? And so maybe look, it doesn't matter which scenario it's in, but make sure that a project
They're
like
balancing.
say R14 or R9 are in different projects because those sort of balance out, because if people don't use a Sunset Fontaine connector, they're forced to 5th Street. So maybe just make sure that those are separated.
I think that's what I was trying to get at.
Would that make
also.
sense?
I'm not sure that I completely follow. I mean, it is challenging in that because there are these 10 different, you know, individual results that we will be showing you as part of the scenario analysis. So, for instance, the congestion mitigation result, it would be quite strange to, in our travel demand model, put the 2 different, this is what you've all mentioned, it would be odd to put both Free Bridge widening and the South Pantops Drive Bridge both in that assessment.
Because they're providing the same
Right.
you would be double dipping essentially with that. You would be
So in that sort of congestion mitigation aspect, yes, very much. For
That's why I'm saying, because R5, if you do R14 and R9 and make those improvements, maybe R12 is no longer necessary.
In that case, which 2 projects? R4?
R14, the
R14.
Old Lynchburg Road and 5th Street ones, because that's where traffic is forced.
R9
if they
and
can't
R4.
So
use
the
R4.
thing about both of those is that they're only multimodal projects, as in they're not showing any increase in capacity. They're not even included in the travel demand model at all.
I got it.
So if you want to think about the way that bicycles and pedestrians are routing, which is something I've thought about a lot recently in our bike and pedestrian plan, yes, but that's not really what
That's
we're
a
looking
big-
at.
But I
Here.
like Kevin's thinking,
I mean, I can tell
but
you
now I
from
see that, yeah.
the old Lynchburg Road, that's the STARS project. We may end up doing a road diet down there, which would reduce the capacity on the road as a
Ooh.
solution to accommodate bike and pedestrian
Yeah.
facilities.
In which
along
case,
the
then
coast.
this becomes even more important.
Well, maybe. I mean,
It
the
may
problem
show,
is
yeah.
the capacity is not there. We don't have the traffic there to justify necessarily that facility, but we do have Southwoods Mobile Home Park, and we do have some development down there
Yeah.
that might promote more bike and pedestrian improvements, which they don't have
Well, and this will
necessarily.
never be a fast road. I mean, again, we're getting at like a whole idea about planning is to be proactive and
Yeah.
and avoid problems in the future.
Yeah.
And but over the time, we just seem to rush to do projects right when the crisis is upon us.
Well, it's dealing with the current emergency because that's what we've
And
been
here
doing.
we've got data and information about growth. We know what's happening. We know, and
Yeah.
to some extent.
But we've got $50 million basically assigned in these
And I know the money's gonna
multimodal
drive it
projects,
all in
which
the
are
end
not
anyway,
even
but I
in there.
just,
And so this.
I mean, I don't
just
wanna
was waiting
limit,
for the
that's
money.
why,
We gotta get to the
when
money
we first
folks.
established the overall list of projects, I wanted to make sure we had everything in there
Yeah.
that we thought we may have to look at over the next 25 years, because that's what the plan is gonna be based on. And then the funding's only gonna cover this much of constraint list, that's the key. And how do we get there?
That's what we're
How do
trying
we
to
get-
drive
and
towards.
this may clearly not get on the constraint list, and I'm
Yeah.
prepared for that, but I wanna just go through all
Alright.
around it.
Okay.
Scrutiny.
Was the decision to put it in scenario D,
I guess.
Yes.
Sunset Fontaine connector,
Yeah.
scenario D?
Okay, which one's next? We were sort
There-
of going page by page and then
Good thing we
we
have
got
it.
off. So
Yeah.
are there-
Do you want? Are there some projects that you want to bring up? Ann?
Well, I
Maybe
have
that
a
would be.
question on
Sure.
R13, how what started out as a $3 million bridge and is now a $7 million bridge got to be $27 million for Eastern Maine. So, I mean, I guess you're talking about going all the way to 240, which is 20 years from now, whereas we have the entire road built except for the bridge over Licking Hole within the next 6 months. And so
Okay.
that would be the most appropriate thing to put in there, and probably what most of the people at the open house voted for was getting the blasted bridge built. Because all the zoning decisions for the last 15 years in that whole area are based upon that bridge being built. And we have people who really wanna
Wow.
help us.
Sure.
I mean, there are thousands of houses all around there that have all
Again,
been
it's
built
one
in
of
the
those
last
deals,
7
you're trying to
years.
anticipate
So,
I'd like to
so,
impacts of growth.
invite Kevin to make any comments on that project.
I think Ann's right on. It would be great if we could split that into two projects, one for the north connection. Or, I mean, honestly, we don't even need to evaluate the north connection right now.
not right
Alright.
now.
We can't build it, but the south connection we can, and it's not even close to that cost. That we have a cost estimate of
The highest was
12,
10 or something,
yeah, 10 million. I think we did look at the growth of the cost and get it up to 12 at the max.
And we can look at it again and come up with
I was gonna say, staff, we can work with county staff to make sure we
Okay.
have the correct information for evaluating that project in the future.
Because
If
that
that
would be-
reduces the cost.
A direct connection, takes pressure off 240, it takes pressure off
Thank
the
you.
intersection at the
Absolutely.
Trestle, all sorts of things
Absolutely.
that would help you. Okay, super, that was the main sort of question I had. And then. Okay, there's that. New bridge, that's in there. That's in there. Okay. So I think that that I don't have any
Alright.
shrieking things to jump up and down about, really. I've been sort of asking questions as I went along. So we'll
I
See
think one
what
of
the
the
next one is.
first things that you asked, Anne, and I think we only got to the first one, was the ones that were removed from the plan. So we talked about R1, and that was largely cost. Can you just speak to R16 and T5 real quickly?
Sure, I'll start with T5. I guess from discussions, it sounds like that's something that the university is already doing.
Yes, that's what I thought.
Oh,
And
Yeah.
that's kind of why that got pulled off, it's
Yeah.
it's already being done, so
okay.
I agree.
nice.
it's not like
I mean, it's not, we're not doing it right now,
Yeah,
but
but
that's
that's-
In
in
their
that-
plan.
that's
Yeah.
in their plan,
Okay.
yeah.
Good.
Then R16, I think that if we go to the cost on that one, that's another interesting one. Plus, there just didn't seem to be that much interest when we were polling the public.
There's not a lot of interest.
But it was brought up that it's like
It's a
who was
safety
the
issue.
audience at the meeting? If we did this on at exit 99 at 5 o'clock in the afternoon and asked people which projects they would like, this one would probably go whoosh.
Or if you're getting somebody coming from Crozet in the spring and fall, and they're going up that rise where the sun hits you in the face.
Today, there was a 5 mile backup this
Yeah.
morning.
That is what we're talking about.
Yeah,
Mhm.
exactly.
That long section of uphill grade both
Eastbound.
directions, where we have sun issues and we have trucks that get in the lane and they can't climb that hill. And this came out of a safety study that was done by the traffic engineering section. This was one of the locations, as well as Afton Mountain, that we might want to consider adding truck climbing lanes to. And I wanted to come out saying, keep it in the visioning list, because if
Okay.
we get funding from some other pot of money outside of what we normally get funding
Understood.
for,
Like a research.
I want to be able to have it identified in the list.
It's definitely on the list for the combined MPO, TJ MPO and
Okay.
Shenandoah,
Yeah.
Progressive Ways.
Yeah, yeah. Oh,
Well, we had that
okay.
meeting last week.
Well-
They're
That's-
doing their side and this is our side.
Yeah.
And
But
hope,
it is an incredible safety issue on the road.
absolutely, and I think,
And that's exactly what it was this morning.
It'd be nice
radio,
if
they were saying
VDOT could
sun and-
do all the
and
projects
just-
on 6.
So how would
Was
this,
there an
how would this
accident
mitigate
there?
against the
Oh, yeah.
sun?
Okay.
At community,
What it
from
would
114 to
basically-
118,
Yeah.
all the way back to
May not
107.
necessarily
Big
mitigate against
solar,
the sun,
no,
but
that's
it's
a
gonna-
plot from a James
it's gonna
Bond movie.
basically take the trucks out of the travel lanes.
Oh,
So the
Got it.
slow moving vehicle, it pulls the slow moving vehicles that are climbing uphill
Out
out
travel
of
lanes.
the main travel lanes.
got it.
So it's
Maybe
not
people won't run into
necessarily-
them as they're going 5 miles an hour.
I see.
When they can't see what they're doing.
Yeah.
Although I've never quite understood why people keep going 60 when they can't see anything.
Yeah.
I mean, literally, I go, I'm heading for the ditch when
Oh,
I get
even,
into that
yeah, during
circumstance
heavy
to drive
fog,
over
it's
it.
amazing.
It's it's that spatial awareness. If you can't
Yeah, that's
judge.
true.
Yeah,
That-
the
that
gentleman
was
from the
interesting.
research council
Yeah.
mentioned
That was very
speeding
interesting.
in fog is you lose your visual landmarks. And,
That was very interesting.
yeah, very interesting stuff.
I understand how the trucks who are getting on there from the exit have trouble climbing. Is it also the through trucks?
It's the grade on the,
So it doesn't matter if they're coming
64.
on the exit.
Yeah, it's
No,
both
it's not the-
directions.
it's not the exit itself, it's the grade of 64 in that
So
section.
even if they're at speed already on.
Between 118, you come off, get on 118, you go around that, and you start up that grade. And then you've got the same downgrade on the other side.
No, I
coming
got
from
it. I
Ivy
was saying
Road.
that the truck's already on 64 and then they hit
It's the
that
same.
grade.
Yeah, they have
Yeah.
trouble maintaining speed
Yeah.
when they're
And
fully
eastbound,
loaded.
once they pass 114, they're going 70.
Yeah.
Right there where the purple starts,
Yeah.
and they just went
They
to
just slow
almost
down.
nothing at the top.
And it's just causing,
Yeah.
that
It's all
speed differential causes,
I got it.
especially with the sun and
I
everything.
kind of assumed it was
an
just the
issue.
trucks coming onto the highway.
No,
not
no,
also
no.
the through.
Cause you don't there's no place for them to go if they get off at exit 114.
Right.
Oh,
and
they
so-
wouldn't go anywhere.
Their
That's a
sudden-
twisty turning
their
road
sudden
like this.
Slowdown is.
It's just-
No, he meant from 29.
Yeah,
I
there
know
is.
people coming from 29.
Oh, yeah.
Climbing the exit.
Yeah.
Then
Yeah.
hitting
And
that
then they gotta
grade.
go up
And they have no
There would
speed
be
at
a
all.
windfall benefit to
Now they have a lane to go do that.
essentially, yeah, they would
Yeah.
have an extended merge lane for for any vehicle using the on ramp. Would have instead of what, a quarter mile now or however long it is now, you'd
Yeah.
have the entire length
100
of
yards.
to 114 to ascend that grade. It would be, there's the benefit to people that are hauling Winnebagos or animals and trailers.
Cattle.
So are you saying the widening would be on the eastbound side too?
It'll go both directions.
Both directions. So there's
That's
uphill
why I
I thought it
grades.
was just the westbound on that.
No, it's on both sides.
Yeah, that's why.
That through that section. And it's
40
just
million.
provide an area for trucks to get into so that they're not bogging down traffic.
Mhm.
And it's mainly on the upgrade side. Once you crest the hill,
Yeah.
you wouldn't have
Right.
that extra
It would go
lane.
away.
It would go away.
But that's why it's so expensive.
And they have the right of way probably already.
Yeah, I
The
don't think
fences
there's
are well outside.
I don't think
the
there
third
was-
road over there, so.
really any
I mean,
right of way cost.
Yeah, I think you've got some cut slopes that
But I
Yeah.
can imagine some engineering.
Yeah,
have to
there
extend
is.
the box culvert over that reservoir.
There's definitely engineering involved
Yeah.
in this one. Yeah. So that would be, we'll move R16 to the visioning list.
Okay, so.
about the commuter bus to Crozet? I mean, that sounds right, sounds good, but that's,
In transit, you wanna mention this, transit is unconstrained.
Yeah, so the way we're looking at it at this point, we did receive some estimates from DRPT on funding for the transit system over this time period. But that's mostly an extension or a continuation of the current funding levels.
okay, so that's, if this money that comes in, this still has a chance to get funded.
Right.
It's
So
not like
we're
being-
putting yes, these commuter bus to Crozet, the bus route to Avon and
All
Mill
that,
Creek,
okay.
increased bus service to Pantops. We're listing these as unconstrained. It's possible, probably kind of you can say similar to the visioning list, where if the funding becomes available, it would be a slightly different pot of funding than everything else that we're putting under the visioning list. But local funding or other DRPT funding becomes available, then those are being listed as
Okay.
being of
Yep.
interest.
Would it be reasonable?
Oh, okay, so it's still on, I see.
Yeah.
Correct. They
I
will
see.
still be included in
I
both
see.
scenarios.
I get it.
Would it be reasonable under the transit unconstrained to add a bullet for the Shenandoah Valley to the city commuter lines that was studied by the two PDCs all last year? And we just didn't quite get enough local money put in to get
Sure.
it going.
Sure, yeah.
But that will also perhaps take people off of 64, reduce all those other sort of combination ripple effects.
Yeah,
as we-
As long
Regional.
as there's nothing requiring that our projects have to be entirely within the MPO, I haven't looked into those.
I think I
Details,
think there's a way we could
but-
structure that, so
Yeah.
it would be focused on,
Well, it also,
And we have-
since it's inter MPO, then wouldn't it need to go on their list too, so wouldn't we need to confer with them?
I
absolutely.
mean, that's what I'm saying, put it on
Yeah.
the unconstrained list, so
Yeah.
that it's in a separate pot of money anyway,
Mhm.
not,
Well, I think part of that was, they needed a rural lot, and so it does go into the rural areas, not necessarily all MPO.
Mhm.
well, that was to capture rural funding, that's
Yeah.
right, and we do have that out on Patterson Mill, so we've identified, there's been a spot identified out there. Which then the UVA bus will be able to use, the Crozet connector will be able to use that same park and ride to be able to pick up people.
Are they trying to
Zoom down
use?
TV.
I'm sorry. Are they trying to use 5311F money for that?
They were.
Was the south of 64 location being found so that we would be able to access some federal money for the?
It was outside the
Jaunt.
MPO in the rural area.
Yeah.
There was also a stop in
Weir's Cave.
Weir's Cave.
Weir's Cave.
Okay.
Those were both rural stops.
Okay, so they'd want to be accessing the intercity bus 5311F money. Is this going to be a commuter bus?
It was gonna run at commuter hours.
Okay,
to
that.
Take,
It wouldn't be like the
Hassle for
Virginia,
people.
the Breeze.
Okay. Okay. So
I
so
think
some.
they had
oh,
two.
I see what you're gonna-
Yeah, that's
two
why I'm asking.
runs during each
Yeah.
week or something
Mhm.
like that. Is that right? Yeah.
Yeah, so it's 2 round trips a day.
Right.
Okay. Yeah. Sorry.
No.
I didn't know. I don't know
and
too
it's
much
in the
about the
dreamland
process.
phase
Okay,
right
so-
now, but there is a lot of statistics about the need and demand and people who wanna use it, et cetera,
Mm-hmm.
that's been gathered over the last year.
Okay, so just the thing about 5311F, it can't be used for commuter services. So just keep that in mind.
I thought they were running more than those routes though.
It was supposed to be for like medical,
I think they were using
And
it
yeah,
for
other-
a lot
other
more
during the day.
airport service.
Cause it was basically
Students home.
Okay.
between Harrisonburg and Charlottesville,
The
Okay.
so it wasn't just,
so
commuter.
There's a lot of different things you have to use. I'm working on the operational analysis to extend the Virginia Breeze, so we're going through this right now. We can have a separate conversation about that.
Okay.
But there's some more issues involved in that if we want to access 5311F.
Well, if this is not the right place to put it,
Yeah.
then take it off, but it was something that
Okay.
wasn't showing up anywhere, so that's why I wanted to mention it.
I think it's a good idea to just have it on there.
Okay.
Again, the transit is kind of a separate beast
Right.
from
Okay.
the long range plan. There is one transit project that does get included in kind of the scenarios, and that is the
Express bus.
express bus, because there's the potential that there would be physical infrastructure costs associated with something like that.
That's the one
Oh,
we
a
have now.
dedicated lane?
Or, yeah, whatever it would, if it was, signals, dedicate,
Yeah, I Right,
whatever
right,
would
right.
come out of the study of
So,
that need.
Yeah, this is T1, the express bus on the US 29 corridor, which would be not just a commuter bus, but would be an all day, some sort of express, connecting. You can see in the map connecting up to the
NJ.
airport and
Ravenna Station.
Yeah, Ravenna Station.
I don't necessarily
Would this-
think it
would
was.
this be BRT or?
I think that a study of the route would determine the exact
Exactly.
Got it.
type of facility and system.
Yeah,
I think it's high level in the plan, and we wouldn't want to call it BRT if it's not going to be successful as BRT.
There's a lot of different. If you look at examples of BRT,
Pretty fast.
they run the spectrum
Yeah.
on what they service.
Yeah.
So you can go from the express bus all the way to fixed transit almost. So it's probably
But-
not fixed transit. It's probably not dedicated lane, but it's probably
Something
not
in the
just
middle.
more. It's more than just regular service. So
We need
it's
something
gonna
from the
be something
airport.
that's going to get you more preemption along the 29 corridor with fewer
Yeah,
stops.
great,
Mhm.
great.
Is what it would
Oh,
probably
great.
end up being.
And we did cost that one, looking at, with fewer stops, you would have things like a need for places for people to park that are coming to that system. So, looking at
Yeah, but I won't have to use Uber and Lyft now to get back into the city.
If you're already working at Europe and you wanna get down to grounds, you just jump on.
Yeah, I
This
mean,
may
and
be
or
the next phase
you're-
from what you're starting
exactly,
already on your own.
Your research park.
When I
again, that's
first
gonna
saw
fill up.
this, I thought it was the one that was already going, so
Correct.
that's why I was so confused.
Yeah.
Okay,
I'm determined not to use
we have
Uber
two
and Lyft.
buses running up and down.
I
49
use
already,
buses.
Which is great. Okay. Well, we thrashed through these pretty well. I'm thankful for the explanations, cause I understand that.
always welcome.
Alright, so what's next? What do you need from us?
Yeah, yeah.
next?
Basically,
Done
this.
it.
You've got what you need.
We kind of need, I would say, maybe it would be advisable if we take a motion to direct staff to conduct scenario 2 evaluation
Okay,
as discussed at the meeting.
based on these changes.
Yes, so should we say exactly what the changes
Yeah.
are? I have written down that there are no changes to what is to be included in both scenarios. What's provided on this page to be included in both scenarios did not change. So included only in scenario D, there are the two listed there, Hillsdale Drive to Rio, Route 20 multimodal, and then also the Sunset Fontaine connector, R12, and the South Pantops Drive Bridge, R19.
Yes.
And then included only in scenario E are the two listed there.
Yep.
US 250 Shadwell, US 250 Freebridge widening.
Having those two pairs is probably a really useful thing, actually, to have,
And
since
then-
they're on the same line, once
And
they
then,
get
yes,
moving
the
along
only
same-
other movement I believe that was indicated was the I-64 truck lanes.
To visioning list.
Active
Right,
visioning
from
list.
the, from removed to plan to the visioning list.
And then we added the regional transit
Yes.
to the.
And
To the
that-
transit system, yeah.
Yes.
And staff will work with Albemarle County staff to redefine R13.
Oh, yes,
Yeah.
thank you.
To just
Oh,
the
thank you,
bridge.
yeah.
Yeah, to
Well, we'll have to look at
The
the
southern
timeline.
connect, the
Southern
southern
connection,
link that's
yeah.
left between Corey Farms and
Yeah.
Westlake is basically what we
Yeah.
have to do. It's not much. And while you're fixing things,
a realign
the R9 is city. And
Oh, yeah, I think a lot of
R6
those are.
is.
that I think
Something got really messed up there.
And R8 is county.
basically
Yeah.
basically it looks
A
like I
bunch of
had
them are-
sort
I don't know what
fields on
happened.
my Excel and I hit sort and that column was not included and it went haywire on me.
So after the next, when you do the next groupings, then will you have a column also after with these or with that or whatever,
Yeah,
where the money comes in? Because if we're looking for $600 million, we gotta start all over, so we just have to get to that as soon as
Well,
we can.
as we and when we make any modification to a project, we will continue to hone our costs. We'll work with Chuck, who's provided the spreadsheet, and yeah.
47, 47, 77, 97.
It's all good, but it's all about money.
We're at 300 million right now for the,
Yeah.
including both scenarios D and E. without even talking about the current stuff. So
Well, and
just want to let you know.
it's
The next time we talk about this in December,
November.
in November.
This was an added meeting. We will resume our regularly scheduled meeting.
The week after Thanksgiving, November 28th.
Okay.
And this will work good because the way we had the sheets done last time, gives you a much clearer picture about the individual projects.
Yes.
And that's what we wanted to try to do this time, because there was a lot of questions came up from the board about what does this mean, and you didn't understand what the project was.
Yeah,
and this was a lot more clear.
And we want to make sure that there's an understanding.
This is extremely helpful and
The presentation.
had a lot of good discussion.
Yeah, I guess.
Okay, yeah.
So you want a motion on this? Is
Oh,
that
yeah,
what-
Yeah, I think it would be good
Got
to
it.
have a motion on this.
So I moved to have staff run round 2 evaluation with the changes as described.
We have a second?
Second.
Okay, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed?
Mm-hmm.
No. We are rocking and rolling. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Next on the list is bike ped plan update with Jacob. Do you have anything you want to add?
Yes, I'll show what's here. You cannot see. These are the posters that were presented at the open house last week. So they are hanging right by the front entrance. When you walk out the door, feel free to glance at some of the information. So yeah, this is also similar information to what I've said before. In November, we will be bringing a good amount of this to you, and also some of what we're writing as far as the plan, the Jefferson Area Bicycle and Pedestrian Plan, which has a lot of recommendations for the urban area, and we'll also be working with in the rural areas and creating recommendations there. So just a few things here. We've looked at the many plans that the city and county here have created and and have approved, and the bicycle and pedestrian recommendations in them. So this is a map with lots of different lines indicating the different bike lanes, shared use paths, and shared roadways that are proposed in various plans done by the municipalities. If you want to go to the next slide. So we've worked with local staff, done a lot of public outreach, and identified focus corridors. So using a lot of the same lines that were on the previous map, but focusing in on the things that are more regional in nature. The paths and bike lanes that people would really use to get around the region.
And
So
I'll interrupt you for 1 second. You're
Yes.
showing Earlysville Road in yellow. And does that mean that is something you're suggesting people bicycle on? Because
so
as an example,
up
it's
to
a really bad idea.
if I'm looking at the correct place
Where it
from
crosses the reservoir from the
Rio,
loop,
down
from
Earlysville,
Rio Loop,
Rio
all the way out
up
to
to
Green County.
no,
and
it's just to
a
the
disaster.
park. Blanking on the name.
Ivy
Creek?
Creek, that's what it
It's
is.
just to
Okay.
Ivy Creek
I
where
got
there's a bike lane being
Right.
indicated as being
Okay.
added there. From
Excellent.
there, it would be what's actually a similar improvement, a paved shoulder, being suggested. So that would
That's
potentially
kind of the rural treatment.
Right.
And it's something that hopefully, if there's right of way, it's something that VDOT can do as part of their paving schedule.
That'd be great.
And it provides, I know, there's a lot of places we don't
Not-
have right of
There's
way.
no right of way there.
They
No.
But-
would have paved it long ago.
Yeah.
The
They
trucks
would've
are falling off
yeah,
the edges
but
all
that's
the time.
it's something that is kind of a multi-benefit. It benefits
Sure.
the cyclists, it benefits the drivers from a safety aspect in that you're no longer, white line ditch.
Oh, yeah.
What do you mean white line ditch? It's ditch.
Ditch.
No
Yeah.
white line.
There's no white line.
But having it noted there, if there is an opportunity and VDOT's out there and, maybe they have to acquire a section around an intersection that they can go, okay, this has been identified as an area where we need to overpave the shoulder. And we have the opportunity to do it, let's get that in. So
when they're on their
when they're doing it,
milling and paving
it's
schedule.
Yeah.
it's making sure that it's expressed so when there's opportunities there to kind of
Good,
build that
okay.
network, we can get at it.
No harm done.
No?
So along with being on the poster in front, this map will be available on our website tomorrow. So yeah, if you're getting in to look at the LRTP projects, feel free to get in and look
As we get
in,
more
zoom
snow,
in
it's
on
gonna
this
be
map
necessary
too.
to have that stuff.
Yeah.
Feel it in my bones.
And so yes, as I noted, these
Sure,
are
sure,
really
snow.
the regional corridors.
New
Like
England,
Vermont.
like Massachusetts, Vermont, That's why they grade biking areas in the rural areas, because they have all those wide shoulders for the snow.
So yes, this is not meant to indicate, every bike ped thing that might be built. Would still be a lot of local pieces that would be very important, and providing people connections to this network so that they can bike and walk.
And many of these are on
throughout
this
the region.
list. This is these multi.
A number of
things that
them
on
are,
here.
yes,
Okay.
but most, there are somewhere on the order of 150 different lines split up here. So by all means, that's a small number of them that are there. But these would be separately, considered for inclusion in the plan. And so, as part of the bicycle and pedestrian plan, we have done some scoring with a prioritization tool. Again, I had indicated a number of the factors at our last meeting that we used to come up with that. So we have come up with kind of a relative score of some of these projects, scoring higher, tier 1, some of them scoring lower, tiers 2 and 3. But this is not final by any means. We're now working through a number of additional aspects, especially with local staff, and getting public input on some cost and right-of-way aspects for all of these, and the planned roadway improvements they were kind of already talking about, and various other aspects. So yeah, at the November meeting we will likely have a more final kind of prioritization of what the kind of tier 1 projects, what the more immediate priorities are for the regions, the regional network.
Yeah, Chris Jensen called me today about looking at 3-notch trail, so.
Talk about right away problems.
So yeah, any
15
questions
miles of
on the bike ped plan in general?
Just more to come. There's
Yeah, exactly.
A lot
more to come.
A lot of interest and a lot of activity around the bike and ped stuff.
And the possible shifts in location for 76 will be part of what that's doing.
Not very
yet.
precisely.
Okay. Is that something we should work on in more places where we know some of the Western Albemarle loops are dangerous and we need to shift
I think
it?
there's definitely an opportunity because
Yeah.
that's maintained by, I think I'm going to say their name wrong, probably the Adventure Cycling. Yeah. And that's kind of something that, VDOT puts out signs, but you guys don't.
There's a
denote the
process
route,
to go through to change that route, those route locations.
And I'm sure that Kevin and whoever could work with
John Bolchek.
John Bolchek in central office, who's the bike ped
coordinates all
coordinator.
that stuff.
Because there was a study within the last 5 years of all the little
all
tiny links of
links,
evaluating where there was
Yeah.
a
Right.
shoulder
So
and
yes, this
giant
plan will
holes to fall in
mostly
and stuff.
will mostly point to that
Yeah,
plan.
would refer to that. Just like, comp plan has appendices where you guys refer to
Historic preservation.
historic, or, a lot of different things.
Yeah, and I think when we did that plan, we looked at that.
Okay.
And we didn't consider any alternatives.
Thank you, everybody.
Well, this is great.
That's
Thank
all
you,
that we
guys.
have. Just make sure, note the calendars, November 28th, and we'll be back in our normal room.
Okay, this was fun.
I like this room.
Any
Matters from the public, anyone who want to address us about anything at all? Hope we don't want to shut you up if you'd like to. All right, I don't see anybody, so we will adjourn early. Thank you. That's
Great, thank you.
Yes, absolutely. Good, thank you.
Started with something completely bewildering.